Let us pray. Lord, open our hearts to hear and heed your word for us this day. Amen. Please be seated. Well, this is the time of the year where a lot of our folks are out enjoying some of the warmer weather, and although it's been nice that we've been getting a little bit of an early taste of spring lately. And there was a story of a couple from Minneapolis, who of course it could be much colder there than here, and who had these plans as well to go down to Florida for a bit of a respite. But given that they were both working and the complications of their schedules meant that they had to go at slightly different times. So the decision was made that the husband would leave for Florida on a certain day, and then the wife would follow him one day later. Now, the man made it down to Florida, and he arrived safely at his hotel. And upon getting to his room, he decided that he'd let his wife know that he'd made it there okay. So he broke out his laptop and decided to write her an email. However, he left off one letter in the email address by accident, and he sent the email off without catching his mistake. So in another part of the country, a widow had just returned from the funeral of her husband, who was a pastor of many years, and who'd been called to glory just a few days earlier. And she decided to check her email because she was expecting to hear from her husband's friends and family. And upon reading that first email that she found in her inbox, she let out a loud scream, fainted, and fell to the floor. The woman's son rushed into the room and found his mother on the floor. He glanced up at the computer screen and saw the following email message. To my loving wife, I've just been checked in. Everything has been prepared for your arrival here tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you then, your devoted husband. P.S. Sure is hot down here. Well, this poor woman definitely did not get what she was expecting. And expectations can lead to misunderstandings, and also an inability to hear and receive the message and how the message was intended. And I think that some of that is going on in today's gospel reading. Now, I'm not sure exactly what Peter was expecting of Jesus and of their future together, but I presume it was something like this. Jesus and his disciples would continue to gain support among the people as they went out and continued to preach and perform miracles. Peter's trust in Jesus and the decision to abandon his old life to follow him would be validated as their band grew in numbers and influence, and at some point perhaps even the nation would embrace Jesus as truly the Messiah that they'd long waited for. And perhaps he'd even start a revolution and rise to political power and lead the nation to overthrow their Roman oppressors. Now, I wouldn't blame the disciples if these were their expectations. We don't know for sure what they were, but if I were them, I think that would all be part of my hope and my expectation. They'd taken risks. They'd seen those risks pay off and being part of this exciting ministry. And I imagine they were hoping to keep the good times rolling. But Jesus throws cold water on their hopes and dreams today. And he began talking openly about the suffering he would have to endure. He spoke of his impending death and resurrection. And this was something that Peter just couldn't wrap his head around. He couldn't understand it. It was so distasteful to him. He pulled Jesus aside, and the text says that he rebuked Jesus. He spoke very harshly to Jesus. We don't know exactly what he said, but it was probably something along the lines of, no way, this is not happening. This is not going to happen to you. I won't let it. And we know later in the story that he takes up a sword to try to prevent Jesus' arrest. Peter just couldn't accept what Jesus was saying. And Jesus pointedly responds, "Get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Now, I don't know about you, but if you've ever been in a heated argument with a close friend or a spouse, and you were to sort of break out this line when you're really upset, like I could never imagine just kind of turning to Lauren in the midst of an argument and say, "Get behind me, Satan." I don't think that would go over very well. I don't think that would help things. It's a very harsh thing to say. It's a very strong thing to say. And it was for Jesus as well. So why is he being so harsh? Why is he identifying the personification of evil in Peter in that moment? And I think there are some different ways that we could unpack that or understand that. But I would like to suggest that at least in one sense, that Jesus is tackling Peter's self-preservation. Peter doesn't want the dangerous things to happen to Jesus, for sure, but by extension, I believe, to himself and the other disciples as well. At this stage in the game, I don't think they had any sense that one day they would be martyred, that they would have to die, that they would have to suffer and die. He doesn't want any part of that. That's not in our human nature. We don't long for suffering. We don't look for hard things to happen to us, unless we're a little masochistic, but most of us, most of the time, we want things to move along smoothly. We want to experience good things, positive things, and we want to survive. We want to protect ourselves, and we want to protect those things and those people close to us. Now, this may be a natural response, and at times certainly necessary. But if taken to the extreme, if left to run unchecked, that spirit or sense of self-preservation can certainly have evil consequences. We need only look to the state or the lack of gun control in the United States of America as an example. And I don't mean to get on a political box here or anything, but the facts are the facts. That embedded in the culture of this country is the notion that I need a gun in order to protect my family, in order to protect myself and my family. And there are people, genuine, sincere people, who really and truly believe that if everybody had a gun, there would be less violence. The facts, of course, are that that's completely untrue. The facts of other countries and everything else bear that out. But this idea and this notion, and it's a lot of other things too, but part of what's at the heart of this is this sense of self-preservation and self-interest, and even the self-interest of politicians who benefit from NRA and other lobbying groups that give them money to support their agendas. And of course, the evil byproducts we see of this, of course, on the news all too regularly, of mass shootings and innocent children being killed as a result. Now, I want to shift from that sense of self-preservation for just a second and get back to this idea of expectations. So I think Peter and the disciples were looking to preserve themselves, their life, their ministry, what's happening, wanting it to go along. And their expectation was that it would, or that Jesus would, continue and carry on in those ways. And so a part of their questioning, I think, and part of what Jesus' teaching gets at is, what does it really mean to be a follower of Jesus? What can or should we expect as Christians? And so to put another spin on that, why are you here? Why are you here in this place? Now, it used to be the case that people went to church because it was just the thing to do. You were brought up in the church, going to church, you continue to go to church, you brought your kids to Sunday school. There were folks, if you were starting a new business, church was one of the best places to network. And it was just one of these things that's where people were. That's where they gathered. This was the social center of our culture for a long time. And we know, of course, that that's no longer the case for the most part. And I would suggest that most of us are here now because we want to be. We're choosing to be here. We're not under pressure so much, unless you feel guilty if you don't go to church. That might be its own form of pressure. But for the most part, don't feel guilty about having to come to church. But for the most part, we're here because we want to be here. And probably, if we're honest, a lot of us feel like there's something in it for us being here. We get to see people that maybe we don't see during the week, who are our friends that we can connect with. We're part of a community that cares, that we know that prays for us, that can support us at times. We know that when we're here, it could be a kind of a sanctuary from the world and from the stresses that we experience in life. And here, maybe we just are here for some good feelings and to feel kind of lifted up and to maybe get just that little bit of inspiration we need to carry on in our journeys. But I wonder if that puts the cart before the horse in a sense. Because I think those are good things, and I think they are natural byproducts of being part of a faith community. But I wonder if that should really be our motivation in living the Christian life and in gathering as a faithful community. Because what would happen, for example, if our churches and the churches in Toronto decided that, all the Christians decided that first and foremost, that they were here to be a blessing to God and to other people? What would happen if people prioritized serving and being engaged in ministry that brings a blessing and hope to others? What if they say that the gathering of the faithful is a highlight of the spiritual journey and actually maybe even a requirement in the path to discipleship? What if when we came and we did gather, we each had a ministry to share? We each had a role to play in blessing God and others. And I believe that the natural byproduct of this approach would be all those good things that we look for and that we need as well. The encouragement, the inspiration, the love, and the compassion. But I think the richest and fullest and most life-filled faith comes when we set our eyes first on following Christ. And that means putting the needs of others first. And Jesus uses two ideas in his teaching to get at this point. He talks about how one must lose their life in order to find it or save it. That there is life in loss. And sometimes those losses are things like things we just need to let go of or drop. Sometimes it's in those times when we are doing things for others that we almost feel like the sense of losing oneself. Now, to be sure, there are limits in terms of how much each of us can do that can lead to being unhealthy. But if you talk to somebody who's quite engaged in ministry and in volunteering and serving others, and you ask them, how in the world do you do it all? And some of you are here in the pews. I know you're here. I think they would respond by saying, I do it and I find joy and life in it. I find meaning and purpose in what I'm doing and how I'm helping other people. And though it may seem like a lot of work, and at times it is very difficult, the rewards are well worth it. The other image that Jesus uses is, of course, about taking up one's cross and following him. And I think Christians have long sort of thought about what exactly that means for us individually, to take up our cross. What is our cross? And sometimes we think of it maybe as an illness or a difficulty that we have, and we use that expression, well, it's my cross to bear. You know, that's not exactly what Jesus is getting at here, I don't think. I've heard it expressed before about how our cross is our reality. It's our life, it's our calling, I think it's our vocation, and our ministries. The cross for Jesus represented the culmination of his work on earth, the fulfillment of God's mandate, and the symbol of our salvation. And he challenges his followers that we need to do the same. Not necessarily die at the hands of the state. I really hope that's not part of my life. But there are many in the world right now, Christians in the world where it is, who are losing their lives for the sake of the gospel. But with that comes a promise, that promise of life. And Jesus, even though he has kind of a difficult message for them to hear, includes not just the fact that he would need to suffer and die, but he also says that he will, after 3 days, will rise again. And he offers this glimmer of hope that at the end of this journey is life, is resurrection life. And we ought not to be afraid to undertake it. And the last thought that I had with this image, taking up one's cross, is that in order to pick up a cross, sometimes we have to let go of certain things to pick it up. And sometimes we have to put down things in order to pick up what Christ is calling us to. And I think that's the case. So much of the time, we have busy lives, we have full lives, maybe we carry even hurts or baggage or bitterness towards the church, or maybe a past experience where getting involved has, made you feel unappreciated or perhaps hurt. There can be any number of things that we use as justification for not trying to live our lives for serving Christ all out with all that we have. And I think in order to pick up a cross, that sometimes those things need to be dropped. Sometimes it's an over-busy schedule. Sometimes it can be any number of things. Any fears, insecurities, any sense of, well, I can't do that. Sometimes those things need to be dropped in order to be open to how Christ might call and lead each one of us. Our stewardship campaign, part of that goal is to help us find that and help us discern that. And I hope you do take that seriously and use it as an opportunity for your own personal discernment in how you follow Christ. The hope I take from the first reading that we had today, the story of Abraham and Sarah, is that it's never too late to heed God's call. Abraham was 99 years old before he truly found his mission and calling. And he obediently gave. He wasn't perfect. He was a very flawed person. But he followed that call. So in conclusion, we know that this life of discipleship can be a challenging one, and a difficult one, but may we also recognize that it is a labor of love. And it is with the hope of resurrection that we carry, and the promise of joy that will meet us. And I close with these words from the author to the writer of the Hebrews, because I think it sums this up very beautifully. And if you remember, the writer to the Hebrews is writing to Christians feeling inept and stressed and unsure of themselves. And he lists for them examples in the Old Testament scriptures, sort of heroes of the faith. Heroes who are, by the way, each and every one of them deeply flawed, but who had faith and who walked in faith and lived by faith. And he points to them as examples of people whose footsteps to walk in. Therefore, he says, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who, for the sake of the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Amen.